Her own father sold her like livestock to a wild Apache warrior, just to save his land. But when that man touched her for the first time, what happened next horrified her family and shook two worlds to their core. It was a scorching August sun that beat down on Hacienda San Cristobal the day Carmela turned 18. But instead of bringing celebration, that day carried the news that would change her life forever. Don Bautista Herrera, 55 years old, his face weathered from years of battling the Apaches who constantly attacked his land, had made the hardest decision of his life. The hacienda stretched across thousands of acres in the Sonoran territory of Mexico in 1876. It was one of the region's most prosperous estates, its cattle grazing on golden pastures and its crops feeding 3 nearby villages. But prosperity had a cost: the relentless attacks by Apache warriors who claimed the land as theirs from ancient times. Carmela was Don Bautista's only daughter, born after 4 strong sons who had already proven themselves defending the family land. But she, brown-haired, honey-lit in the sun, eyes green as emeralds, had grown up protected, shielded by the adobe walls of the main house, completely unaware of the brutal realities her brothers faced every day in the fields. A beautiful girl, Don Bautista muttered that morning as he watched her feed the doves in the courtyard from his office window. But useless in times like these. His words were cold, but they cracked something deep in his chest. Carmela had grown into a sweet, obedient girl with a smile that could brighten the darkest day. But in a world where survival meant strength and cunning, kindness seemed more like a liability than a virtue. That afternoon, Colonel Mendoza arrived with a proposition that felt more like an ultimatum than a deal. The Apache attacks had grown more intense in recent months, and the Mexican army could no longer guarantee the protection of every hacienda. But there was a way, a chance to forge a temporary truce, a pact that could save lives on both sides. "We have a special Apache prisoner," the colonel had said, pouring himself a glass of mezcal in the very room where destinies were often sealed. "He's not just any warrior. This one's Takoda, nephew of Chief Mangas, one of the most respected leaders of their people. We captured him injured after the last raid. Instead of killing him, we want to use him to negotiate." The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Give Carmela to the Apache warrior as a sign of goodwill and respect, sealing a forced marriage that would hopefully stop the attacks. It was an ancient custom used by many cultures throughout history to unite warring territories. But for Don Bautista, it meant handing over his only daughter to a world he considered savage and dangerous. "My daughter is not some commodity to trade," he had thundered, slamming his fist on the old oak desk that had once belonged to his grandfather. But Colonel Mendoza knew how to break desperate men. "Your sons," he said with icy calculation, "are ready to marry and start their own families. If the raids continue, there'll be no hacienda left to inherit, no sons left to carry your name. One daughter's sacrifice could save an entire generation." The words cut deep. For hours afterward, Don Bautista paced the office like a caged animal, torn between paternal love and his duty to protect everything he'd built. He'd seen too many estates burned to the ground, too many families destroyed by a war that never seemed to end. By the time he called Carmela into the room, the sun was setting, painting the sky in reds and golds, as if foreshadowing the storm about to erupt. She entered with the natural grace she'd inherited from her mother, Doña Amparo, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. "My daughter," Don Bautista began, not meeting her eyes. "I've made a decision that will protect this family and everyone who depends on us. Tomorrow, You'll leave for Apache territory. You'll live as the wife of one of their warriors." The words struck her like lightning splitting a tree. For a moment, she thought she'd heard wrong. Her mind couldn't comprehend the weight of what her father had just said. "Father," she whispered, voice shaking. "You're serious?" "Entirely," he replied. And for the first time in her life, Carmela saw tears forming in the eyes of the man she had always believed was stronger than the mountains that surrounded their land. "It's the only way to protect what we've built. Your sacrifice will save your brothers, your mother, everyone on this land." The word sacrifice rang in Carmela's soul like a funeral bell. In that moment, she realized she had never truly been a beloved daughter. She was a piece on a cruel chessboard called survival. Doña Amparo, who had been listening from the hallway, burst into the room, her face wet with tears. Her daughter was the center of her world, the light in a life where joy was a luxury rarely afforded. "Bautista, you can't do this," she cried, clutching Carmela as if her embrace could shield her from the harsh decisions of the men around them. "She's our child, our only girl. These Apaches, we don't know what they'll do to her." But Don Bautista had steeled his heart. The decision had been made. "It's done, Amparo. The colonel leaves at dawn. Dakota awaits her at the military camp. From there, she'll be taken to Apache land." That night was the longest of Carmela's life. She didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above her, beams she had known since childhood, realizing it was the last night she'd ever spend under the roof that had kept her safe for 18 years. Her most treasured belongings fit inside a single small leather trunk. The Bible her grandmother had given her, a few family heirlooms, and the white dress her mother had embroidered for a wedding day that would now come in the most unexpected way. At sunrise, as golden light spilled over the adobe walls, Carmela said goodbye to everything she had ever known. Her brothers embraced her with the clumsy awkwardness of men not taught how to say goodbye. Her mother wept until there were no tears left, whispering prayers into her ear, promising she would always live in her heart. The journey to the military camp took 2 days. Cutting through landscapes that grew wilder with every mile, Carmela rode in silence, watching civilization fade behind her, replaced by rocky mountains and endless desert that stretched like an ocean of dust. When they finally reached the camp, Colonel Mendoza led her to a tent where the man who would change her fate stood waiting. Dakota. He stood tall, hands tied behind his back, but his presence seemed to fill the entire space. 26 years old, strong, his skin sun-darkened, hair black as night falling in waves over his shoulders. His eyes were dark, deep, like someone who had seen both glory and tragedy. When he looked at Carmela, it was as if he could see through her. "This is the woman they send me?" he asked in accented Spanish, turning to the colonel. His voice held a stunned disbelief that made Carmela's cheeks burn with humiliation. "You think I'll accept someone handed over like a dog thrown a scrap?" The colonel's expression turned hard. "You don't have a choice, Apache. This woman is part of the deal. Treat her with respect, or face the firing squad again." For the first time since she'd arrived, Carmela found her voice. "I didn't ask to be here either," she said, her tone calm but firm. "But here we are, so we'll both have to find a way to survive this." The words came out steady, without self-pity. And Dakota looked at her with new eyes. In those emerald eyes, he didn't see a fragile girl. He saw someone frightened, but unbroken. Someone who stood tall in the face of fear. When they were finally left alone in the tent, their eyes met and held. Two strangers, bound by choices neither of them made. Two captives of other people's decisions, but perhaps two people with the power to write a new story, one that no one else could have predicted. The journey to Apache territory lasted 3 days, but felt like a lifetime. Carmela rode in silence atop a dappled mare, her back straight, eyes forward. Dakota rode beside her on a painted horse that moved as if it shared his soul. He didn't speak, not once, but she could feel him watching her from time to time, his gaze assessing, perhaps even curious. The land changed with each passing hour. The farther they traveled, the more the world seemed to peel away from what she had known. Mountains rose like sleeping giants, crimson and rust-colored against the endless sky. The valleys below were covered in cacti, thorny brush, and ancient rocks that seemed to whisper forgotten stories when the wind blew. This was a different world, raw, untamed, proud. When they finally arrived at the Apache settlement, it felt as though she had stepped into another universe. The village was arranged in a perfect circle around a central fire that burned steady, its smoke rising to the heavens. Leather tents, sturdy and weather-worn, stood in silent vigil. Children with sun-kissed skin darted between them, their laughter pausing as they noticed the outsider among them, the woman with pale skin and foreign eyes. Dakota gestured toward a smaller tent near the outer edge of the circle. His voice, hoarse from disuse, finally broke the silence. "This is your shelter," he said. "I'll sleep outside until we figure out what happens next." His tone wasn't cruel, but it held no warmth either. It was the sound of a man resigned to a life shaped by duty, not choice. Carmela nodded, swallowing her fear. She knew she had to earn respect here. If not love, then at least a place. The tent was simple but clean. A buffalo hide bed, a few clay pots, and a small space to store what little she had. It was more basic than even the servants' quarters back home, but somehow grounding. There was no pretense here, only survival. The first days were brutal. The Apache women watched her with wary eyes, their expressions unreadable. To them, she was an invader, a living reminder of the men who had killed their sons, their brothers, their husbands. Trust would not come easy. It was Aisha, a middle-aged woman with hands scarred from years of labor, who first broke the silence. "You know how to do anything?" she asked bluntly in broken Spanish. "Or just sit like hacienda lady?" Carmela stood her ground. "I can sew, cook, dress wounds. My mother taught me. I'm willing to learn your ways." The honesty in her answer shifted something in Aisha's gaze. There was no arrogance in Carmela's voice, no superiority, just a simple truth. She wanted to be useful, to belong. From that moment, the women began to teach her. Under the hot desert sun, Carmela learned to tan hides, her soft hands soon rough and calloused. She learned which desert plants could heal, which could kill, and how to find water where none seemed to exist. Every scraped knuckle, every burn, every ache was a badge of progress. Dakota watched from afar, never interfering. True to his word, he slept outside her tent every night, a silent guardian. Sometimes she would hear him moving by the fire, pacing, humming a song she didn't recognize. He was a mystery. One evening, the peace of the village shattered. A group of children hadn't returned from gathering wild fruit in the canyon. The sun dipped fast behind the mountains, and the desert's dangers multiplied in the dark. Wild animals, loose rock, and worst of all, Mexican patrols who shot first and asked questions never. Nalnish, the acting village chief, called for search parties. "Dakota," he ordered, "you know the northern trails better than any man." Dakota's face tightened. This was his chance. Prove his loyalty or run. Every eye in the village turned to him. "I'll go," he said without pause. Then, to everyone's shock, he added, "She comes with me." He pointed to Carmela. A collective gasp rose. Even she blinked in surprise. "The white woman?" Nalnish asked, confused. "She has small hands. She can reach places we can't. If the children are trapped, she could save them." It was the first time Dakota had acknowledged her as something more than baggage. Carmela felt a strange mix of pride and terror rise in her chest. They left before moonrise. The trail into the canyon was treacherous, narrow paths lined with crumbling stone and shadows that moved when you weren't looking. Dakota moved like he was born of the wind, silent and fluid. Carmela followed as best she could, her breathing shallow, her heartbeat loud in the silence. At a hidden spring tucked between stone walls, they paused. She took a long drink, the cold water a blessing. "Why did you bring me?" she asked finally. Dakota didn't answer right away. He looked at her with that same searching gaze from the military camp. "Because you needed to prove your worth, and I needed to prove mine," he said. "If we come back without those children, we're both just burdens. But if we succeed, maybe we both earn a place here." His words weren't unkind. They were just honest, brutally so. And she understood. Not a warrior, not a bride, not a victim, a survivor. They kept moving. It was Carmela who heard the faint sobs, hidden under layers of rock and wind. She pointed to a narrow crevice in the canyon wall, where shadows swallowed the moonlight. "There," she whispered. Dakota knelt, peering into the crack. 3 children, alive, huddled in a natural chamber beneath the rocks. But the opening was too tight for any full-grown warrior to fit. "I'll go," Carmela said before he could stop her. She was already assessing the angle. "It's dangerous," he muttered. "Everything here is dangerous," she replied, tying a handmade rope around her waist. "But this I choose." Her descent was slow, careful. Inside, the children clung to her like she was a miracle. One by one, she secured them to the rope. Dakota pulled them up, gently, like they were made of glass. When he finally hauled her out, his hands were shaking, not with exertion, but with something else. Respect? Gratitude? It was hard to say. "You have the heart of a warrior," he said softly. The words struck deeper than any compliment she'd ever received. When they returned to the village with the children, Carmela was no longer just the Mexican girl. She was the one who saved their sons and daughters, the one who risked her life when she didn't have to. That night, as the fire crackled and the village celebrated, Dakota approached her tent for the first time. "May I sit with you?" he asked. "It's your village," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I'm still the unwelcome guest." "Not anymore," he said, lowering himself beside her. "Tonight you proved you're more than just a guest." For the first time, they talked. Really talked. He told her about his capture, how he had fought until his body collapsed protecting the elders in his camp. She shared what life was like behind the walls of San Cristobal, how she had never known if she was truly needed, until now. "Do you miss your old life?" he asked as the embers glowed like fallen stars. "I miss knowing what to expect," she replied, "but I don't miss feeling useless. Every day here, I earn my place." Dakota nodded. "I miss the freedom to ride without borders, but I don't miss the loneliness of not belonging." That night, they said goodbye under the stars, with something unspoken lingering in the air. They weren't captives anymore. They were becoming something else. The days that followed transformed Carmela's life completely. Where once she had been seen as an outsider, now she was someone the Apache people called on for help. The women who had once eyed her with suspicion now invited her to work alongside them. Her hands, once soft and unused to labor, wove baskets, stitched hides, and brewed medicine from desert herbs with confidence. The children, especially the ones she had helped rescue, ran to her with laughter, tugging at her skirts and begging for stories. But none had clung to her quite like Pequeño Lobo. The 6-year-old boy, the first she had lifted out of the canyon, had quietly become her shadow. His parents had died months earlier in a raid, and though the tribe cared for him, he had no family left. Something in Carmela's warmth had filled a hole in his heart, and in hers. One morning, while they sat weaving cord for fishing nets, his tiny voice cut through the quiet. "Are you going to stay here forever?" The question hit her like a thunderclap. Forever. She hadn't thought beyond today in weeks. She had only been surviving, adjusting, learning, but planning a future. "I don't know," she answered truthfully, brushing his dark hair from his forehead. "Would you want me to?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Dakota wants you to stay too. I see it when he looks at you." Carmela smiled, touched by the child's wisdom. Children often saw the truth faster than adults dared to speak it. And yes, something had changed in the way Dakota looked at her. It wasn't just observation anymore. It was something deeper. That very afternoon, as she crushed desert herbs with Aisha to make medicine, a young warrior came running into the village, his breath ragged and eyes wide. "There's a family of settlers camped near the sacred spring," he gasped. "A man, a woman, 2 children, sick, the kind of fever that kills." The mood in the village shifted instantly. The spring was a holy place, used for generations in sacred ceremonies. No outsiders were allowed near it. Violating that space was a serious offense, an insult. And now, sickness threatened to contaminate it. "They must be driven off," declared a young warrior whose father had been killed by Mexican soldiers. "So let them die elsewhere." "If they're that ill, they won't make it far," argued another. "Their corpses would pollute the spring worse than their presence." Dakota listened in silence until all had spoken. Then he stood. "I've seen this fever," he said. "It killed my little sister 3 winters ago. If that's what they have, they won't survive long. But they also won't have the strength to leave." And then Carmela stepped forward. Though women weren't permitted to speak in council, she crossed the invisible line and faced the gathered men. "I can help them," she said, voice steady. "This fever, I've seen it too, on my father's land. I know how to treat it. If they recover, they'll leave on their own. If they die, they won't do it sick and alone. Let me try." A heavy silence followed. Nalnish looked at her with both caution and curiosity. "What if they recognize you?" he asked. "What if they try to take you back?" "Then they'll prove they didn't deserve my help," she answered. "But if they're truly dying, all they'll want is relief. Let me bring it." Dakota rose slowly. "I'll go with her," he said. "If anything goes wrong, I'll protect her. And if the medicine works, I'll bear witness that she chose to save Mexican lives, to protect Apache land." 2 hours later, they rode out together. Their bags were filled with poultices, bark, and roots Carmela had prepared with Aisha's help. The trail was familiar now, the land less foreign. They didn't speak, but it was a comfortable silence. Not the cold distance of strangers, but the focused stillness of two people united in purpose. When they reached the spring, the situation was as dire as reported. The settler family had built a sad little camp near the sacred water. The father was unconscious, burning with fever. The mother was pale and trembling, barely able to lift a rusty rifle. Two children, sickly and weak, clung to her skirt. "Who's there?" the woman croaked as they dismounted. Her voice cracked from fever. "We've come to help," Carmela said gently in Spanish. She raised her hands to show she meant no harm. "I'm a healer. I can make medicine." The woman blinked at her. You're Mexican?" "Yes," Carmela replied. "But I live with the Apache now." She knelt beside the children, her hands moving with certainty. Within minutes, she was brewing a tea from willow bark to lower their fevers, placing herb-soaked cloths on their heads, making broths from desert roots and water from the spring. Dakota stayed near, his posture alert, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. "Why are you helping us?" the woman asked hours later, once she had regained enough strength to sit. "You're strangers. He's Apache. I thought you'd kill us." Carmela didn't stop grinding herbs, because there are moments when you must choose between hatred and compassion. I choose compassion. Dakota, sitting nearby, looked up at her words. In that moment, he saw her not as a settler's daughter, not as a traded bride, but as someone with a warrior's spirit. Not the kind that fights with weapons, but with heart. By the second evening, the family was already improving. The children were laughing. The father could sit up. The fever had broken. Before they left, the settler placed a trembling hand on Carmela's shoulder. "We have nothing to give you," he said, voice thick with emotion, "but we'll never forget you." "Just don't return to places that aren't yours," she said kindly. "Let this land rest in peace." After they disappeared into the distance, Carmela and Dakota sat together by the sacred water, the moon casting silver light across the surface. "Why did you really do it?" he asked. It wasn't just compassion. Carmela stared at the stars before answering. "Because I needed to prove I could protect this land too. Not by killing, but by saving." Dakota nodded slowly. "You understand more about being Apache than many born here." They sat in silence for a while, and then Dakota spoke again. "My real name is Itzel," he said. "It means Star of the Night in my grandmother's language. Dakota is just the name I use with Mexicans. It's easier for them." He paused. "But you deserve my true name." Carmela smiled softly. "Itzel," she repeated, trying the shape of it in her mouth. "It's beautiful." "And your name?" he asked. "My mother told me it means Garden of God." "Then your name is perfect," he said, with a rare smile that softened every angle of his face. "Because you've turned this harsh land into something that grows beauty." That night, when they returned to the village, something had changed. Not just in how the others saw them, but in how they saw each other. Itzel no longer slept outside her tent. For the first time, he asked for permission to stay on the other side of her fire. Respectful, quiet, present, and for the first time, Carmela said yes.